This is the Slots and Sockets podcast, episode number 13, and we've got a special edition with a special guest. I am one of your hosts, iRdMoose.
I'm TurboPenguin, and today we have a token console gamer. Our only token console gamer, Lakers. How's it going, Lakers?
Welcome to the show, Lakers.
How you guys doing? Thank you.
So how is Consoletopia treating you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Straightforward.
Straightforward.
So, did you get your PS5 Pro yet?
No. And I wasn't planning on getting one. However,
you've changed?
They did announce a 30th anniversary PlayStation 5 Pro that there's only like 1,200 of them. So I may get one for resale value.
They're getting you with the collector's edition. Got it.
There's only 1,200 of them, so likelihood of me getting them very low. Yeah, they're literally numbered. Yeah.
Okay.
So
real quick, and we're just going to dive in because there's really not a ton of computer news this week. So we really wanted to kind of talk because really the only big thing is PlayStation 5 Pro, right?
Yeah.
And so what initial thoughts? Are you excited for PlayStation 5 Pro? Do you think the Pro is sort of just like whatever? Spill your beans.
Yeah, so generally in the previous consoles there's been, and for a long time the consoles couldn't keep up with PC by any means. You could build a PC with the ability to outperform any console. I believe up until the PS5 came out. PS5 during COVID, that era, that was like the first time that the hardware in the console was equivalent or up to snuff with PCs of the time. So previous generations, there's always been some kind of iteration where you went from a disk to a solid state drive, so that decreased your load times and different things like that. But this iteration so I'm looking here at kind of a compilation of everything, the mega thread on Reddit. But basically, it says overall you can have 45% faster rendering for gameplay, advanced ray tracing, AI-driven upscaling. But for the price, yes, you do get like a 2 terabyte SSD. And when I bought an SSD to put in my PS5 to make it 2 terabyte, it was at the time like $300-400, like ridiculous. Now you can get a 2 terabyte that works for $130. But as I don't know what they're adding. I'm looking for generational upgrades, and I find that probably the majority of PS5 owners will not upgrade to the PS5 Pro because it's not worth it. I would rather pay the price and get a better GPU for my PC, which also leads to another thing. The reason a lot of console players stayed with console were games. But look at Helldivers, which we've played. Ton of fun.
Mm-hmm.
It launched on PlayStation at the same time as PC. And, some of my favorite games, Ghost of Tsushima, an incredible gaming experience now on PC. And I find that probably Sony, Xbox are seeing the benefits financially of releasing these things on Steam at the same time as they do console. And so I think that more people are going to make the jump to PC, unless there's significant upgrades in the consoles themselves.
So real quick on that. So we've got a couple of token games like Sony has that has never come to PC. Gran Turismo has never come, but even then, like Final Fantasy games have made their way to PC. Do you think that this is going to kind of be the end of console exclusive games? Because, the honest truth is that they're mostly sharing the same hardware. Developers can sit there and say, yeah, I could sell, 3 times as many if I open up to PC.
I do. I believe so, and I believe there's also been somewhat of a, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there's been more of a streamlining of development tools. So like a lot of times when they would remaster a console game, they would have to get an entire development team to like be able to port it over to PC. It was a huge endeavor. And maybe with Unity's horrible, we're gonna charge you per install of your game, and everyone's saying, well, like, here's the bird, we're gonna go somewhere else. Like, I think there's kind of been this standardization across developers where they're basically making it on PC for PC, and now the consoles can run those games. And I think the big companies are going to say like this console exclusivity is just hurting us in our pocket. They can sell the game virtually. They have little to no expense in that to have someone download the game. And so I think the future is they're going to lean heavily into their games. And that's why I've seen them buying up, Xbox bought up Activision, Sony bought up, Bungie, like all these huge acquisitions to develop games.
Well, yeah. if you look at like Unreal, right? Like the Unreal Engine, you can build it once, and other than doing some polishing, between the different versions, 80% of the heavy lifting is done with the initial content creation. I think the only thing that they really need to do is to kind of find out the weird things. And I think, to be honest, a lot of the problems are maybe on the Xbox side, because the Series S, which is not fast enough and really struggles to play a lot of games above 720p, whereas the Series X, which I'm surprised at how few people own the X. The numbers are surprising. It's like for every one X, there's like 5 S console buyers.
Yeah, it really didn't sell well.
Which is crazy is that like that is a huge difference in the graphics on between the X and the X. It was supposed to be like a dumbed down, like, hey, entry level gaming, but like more people are like, yeah, give me the cheap one. Yeah, we have Sony on their side be like, yeah, so we're gonna trouble you. We're gonna add $300 to our price. Let's see how this goes.
Right.
Like, if PlayStation 6 comes out, because if the PlayStation 6 comes out, if people actually buy this thing at $700, $699 for a discless model, like, is this just setting up people to be spending $800-900 for a console with the 6? Or do you think the 700 is really kind of where, like, it won't go above much higher than 700?
What were you going to say, Moose? What were you thinking?
Well, I've been thinking a lot of this situation is console gamers, in my experience, tend to be fairly heavily price motivated. Now, I don't know if that's the case for you, Lakers, but with Sony making this push and removing the disc option, which is something I'd like to get to later, I just don't see the value judgment. But again, I come from the PC world. My last console is literally right back there, a fatty PS3 40 gig that I dropped a 500 gig hard drive into, which I haven't even powered on since probably 2017. And that was to play Kingdom Hearts 2.5 Remix.
So, great game. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. And well, so, where do people stand in the console side of things? Because I mean, we really do have two different worlds here.
Yeah, I think we're looking at a generational issue, a transition here. So, for example, with the S and the X, I think Xbox shot themselves in the foot because they did the exact same thing with the 360 and adding the Kinect. So basically, when PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were coming out, you could not buy a 360 version without a Kinect. And so it was $100 cheaper to buy a PlayStation 3. And I think that was a huge turning point for people going to PlayStation. That was it for me. I was an Xbox, like only person before that. And then I transitioned to PlayStation. Well, and then like I got the PlayStation 4, I got the PlayStation 4 Pro because there was a significant upgrade. I even dropped an SSD in the 4. And then I've got a number of PlayStation 5 with, people, and I don't know if there was a, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like they do with diamonds, there's not a true shortage, but there is a, it makes it difficult to find. So people are buying them.
It's like Nintendo did with the Wii. It's artificial scarcity.
Artificial scarcity. That's what I was looking for. Exactly. So, however, my experience with the Xbox, so I'm in a place where financially I can afford these luxuries, and I bought an Xbox S initially, and I was like, I'm going to get a PlayStation 5. I already spent a lot of money on that. Like the nuts and the bolts of the 5 were just, from what I had heard rumored about when they came out, were just levels beyond what the Xbox was offering. So I was like, well, I still want to play some Xbox exclusive games, so I'll buy the S. I ended up selling it within a month, and I bought the X because I'm like, well, probably if I want to play something, it's a game that I have already on disc, and I want to be able to throw a disc in and play that game without a problem. Now, this was before like the model of Xbox Game Pass came out. And so again, this transition to generationally to streaming platforms. So I think these companies are preparing themselves to become streaming platforms, and that's what Xbox is placing itself to be able to become, because they can get great teams to build good games, and then if they stream it, their cost goes way down. From what I heard, as far as the PlayStation 5 selling, is that, and I believe it, that their margins were extremely small on the console itself. If not, PlayStation was losing money on every PS5 console they were selling, because the goal was to get people into their ecosystem, and then they would generate revenue that way. I wonder if the price hike is actually just the cost of building these things. But essentially, these companies have subsidized the cost of these consoles to get them into people's houses because they were in it for the long run with games.
Well, yeah, because a lot of times with the games, they were making it up on the licensing fees. And since these systems are basically Linux or Windows-based PCs, if you're on the PS5 or the Xbox side, they're not really able to push that because, why just build the game for the console when you can build it for all three as a checkbox feature? So, sorry, Turbo, you were going to say something.
Well, no, I was also thinking with the PlayStation 5, it's almost kind of nice that Sony doesn't really have any competition here. Microsoft has been, I mean, just not really doing anything here in that space. So, I mean, it's a really interesting thought is that they could charge whatever and see how it goes. And I do believe that some people are in that space who believe that this is Sony trying to figure out where the price point is, where they start seeing diminishing returns. I mean, you saw we had the 4 and the 4 Pro, so they can understand what sales looked like between the 4 and the 4 Pro. And it sounds like 5 and 5 Pro is enough of an uplift that it's similar in a lot of respects. It's the question is how do people respond with that price tag? And is it going to be shocking enough for people like, holy crap, buckets, no. Maybe this is a market test for them to see how much they can charge for a PlayStation 6.
That's and I think kind of to your point, Lakers, earlier, they might be trying to make up some of that loss that they had in the past with the PS5 and the PS4 and even the PS3, because that was rumored to be selling at a loss as well. And then also we have the big flop that we shall not talk about called Concord, but
Oh, man.
that's there've been some jokes around that the PlayStation 5 is really, a $500 console with $150 stacked on for Concord fees. But,
It's very true.
I
Well,
mean,
and in the same week they dropped Astrobot, the game, which
mhm.
may become their iconic platformer. I'm just playing it right now. My kids are loving it and stuff like that. So, game development is a gamble, and you can have something in development limbo for 10 years and waste, hundreds of millions of dollars, or you can have some like Among Us that is a very low budget that, makes tons of money. Same thing with Helldivers, they weren't expecting that to make any money.
Yeah, and it just
Depends.
exploded on the PC scene, and until Sony got their mitts into it. And
Yep.
then, but hey, Helldivers, in its defense, is starting to make a comeback now.
Yep.
The
Numbers on
Arrowhead
Steam are
seems
up.
to be
Yep.
doing well. Yep. And that's the funny thing. We're not seeing the PlayStation numbers. And
Mm-mm.
from what
Not at
I'm
all.
hearing, the PlayStation numbers are similar. And the interesting thing is, kind of going back to the development thing, they're releasing the patches on PC and PlayStation same day, which means they're not having to do extra development. It's just a checkbox option for them.
Yep.
So, really, Sony has no advantage in that respect, at least from my perspective, because, you got the everything's in one box and it's good to go, but everything's in my one box and that's good to go. And I'm recording this
Exactly.
podcast on it. You can't do that on PlayStation.
Well, let me offer you this. I foresee the future looking different for PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. So, for example, I have right here kind of the PlayStation 5 Pro controller. It has the back paddles. What I like about it is these sticks are removable. So as you get wear and tear on the accelerometers, you can just go ahead and pop out that thumbstick and replace that instead of having to buy an entirely new controller. There's software that allows you to change the acceleration curve of each thumbstick to kind of nuance the controller for the game you're playing. And I mean, this controller was $200, right? And if you buy a Scuff or one of these other third-party modded controllers, that's what it's going to run you. Yeah, you're playing with the Switch controller. Or is that the Xbox Elite?
No, this is the Xbox Elite Gen 2. The Elite
The
Gen
Xbox
1,
Gen 2.
the Gen 1
still have
is
that.
going for 150 now.
And they're great pieces of hardware.
Yeah, phenomenal.
And they're still really good.
The key difference, though, between the Gen 2 Elite and the PS5 Pro controller is that, while the replacement controllers is nice, number one, you can't get the parts right now. And number two, they're still potentiometers. These are Hall effect. These don't wear out.
Okay. Gotcha.
And it's got adjustable tension in the Gen 2. So I'm not trying to be a sales pitch for Xbox. I'm just saying, here's the comparable product from brand X.
Well, and this one here, this one is a controller that I use. It's a Ghillie kit.
Okay.
Is that for the Switch? So PC, Switch, PlayStation.
Okay.
It's really cool because it has a record function where you can record like 15 minutes of like a macro. There you go.
Has RGBs.
And then these, I remember Linus Tech Tips did a thing on them, but they're magnetic. The joysticks
that's
are
Hall effect.
Hall effect. So they won't ever wear out, and are going to give you instant feedback.
And that's the thing that a lot of people I know who have Switch and PlayStation both complain about is stick drift. If you play even a moderate amount, is horrible in very short order. And,
I've sent my 4 controllers into Nintendo for the stick drift on the Switch, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing is iFixit now has a Hall effect repair kit that you can do for the Switch. So I'll send you that link after the show, but you know, that's another thing about PlayStation that baffled me is why would they release a Pro controller with sticks that everybody hates over the long run? Now, when they're new, they're great.
No,
You know,
wait, real quick.
but
Are they doing a Pro controller at the same time with the PS5 Pro? Or is it
They
just the
do.
console?
No, they have various packages. So you can get like the Pro with a charger and with a controller. You can just buy a Pro controller. I'm talking specifically more about the 30th anniversary. So they do have like packages that are like launching simultaneously with the Pro.
and that 30th anniversary one,
Oh.
that's a Pro controller too, right? That's not just a regular controller.
No, the Pro controller is a separate
Okay.
purchase.
Gotcha. So if
So
you
you
want to
buy a
get the
PS5 Pro. So yeah, you buy the PS5 Pro, you get the standard controller.
You get the standard
And
PS5 controller.
And then you gotta go buy the fancy Pro controllers. So you
Pro
get double
controller
Pro.
if you want it.
That's
If you
another
want the
if you've got
another
both
200.
Pros, then you'll be called Uber Pro.
Well, and that leads me to kind of my thought process is, and I guess, you know, I know Turbo likes cars, so kind of the analogy would be with cars. So my idea is that PlayStation is probably going to market itself to the high-end customers. And what they're going to do is they're going to build their consoles and their products for people who have the financial freedom to do that. It's the person who goes and buys a high-end car and they take it in to be serviced by the dealer whenever it needs to be serviced. Okay. But you know, there's those of us who grew up in a generation where we fix things. Right? You don't just throw things out, you're going to fix it. And a PC is much more, you know, appealing to a person who likes to do that. And I think that's our generation and older. You know, but the new generation up and coming is very much a status generation and a throwaway generation. If it's broke, I'll just go buy a new one because they want the new one. So the idea of like the stick drift or getting a new controller, I'll just get a new one. They have no concept of, well, let me go ahead and fix it, or something should last forever, because they haven't lived in a world where that's kind of the promise. So I suspect in the future, PlayStation is going to make high-end products, and they're going to recoup costs by producing good games that they release on Steam and PlayStation simultaneously. Xbox is really pushing the streaming service. They want to be the one place for you know, Hulu, Xbox, everything. You can play your game, you can do whatever, and I suspect they're going to be getting out of the physical console game in the future. I mean, if I've been reading kind of what Phil Spencer's been trying to accomplish, and then, you know, I think we're at a place where people are going to who want to spend the money are going to go to PC because they have the money. If they're going to spend the money on a console or buy a GPU, they can do that. But I think there's going to be a generation of kids younger that are just going to say, I want the status symbol, and I just want it to be easy because I can't be bothered to kind of figure out how to insert my RAM, how to troubleshoot when my mouse doesn't work.
Right. Plug it into a different port and be good to go.
Right.
But
that's why they want the console.
So
is because they just want to plug it in.
Yeah, and you said a key word there. You said physical when you were talking about Microsoft, how they're abandoning that. And, you know, I see the PS5 Pro is kind of heading in that direction. But, you know, for somebody like you who, you know, potentially has a library of physical games, do you see that not including the disk drive as a roadblock to somebody like you who might have a PS4 and want to upgrade to a 5 Pro? Just make the big jump.
I mean, when I had the choice between the PS5 with the disc or discless, I went with the disc because I've wanted to play games. At the time, my internet was, my downloads were not great. Now I have fiber, and so like that changes the game. And so it depends on who your market's for, right? If you're trying to sell this, like for example, the PlayStation, the website wasn't available in certain countries, right? So that's where Helldiver's problem was. Like they couldn't authenticate or play Helldivers because like in those countries, like PlayStation.com wasn't available. And so, if you're looking to sell to a country of people who have very little access, I think physical is still really important. Or do you just go all in and say we're an elite company and only people with status and influence and money will buy our product?
Okay, so speaking of discs, I've been, look, PlayStation 1 only disc. 2 and 3 were only disc, and it was kind of around 4 where you could start getting games on the store instead of a disc, right?
Three kind of started that because PSN got
Okay.
going, and there were games. I think it was Gran Turismo. Was it 5? You could get either on disc or online. That was one of the first ones, and then they started bringing back some of their back library with the PS3. But
So, but here's
to your point, yeah, it wasn't common then.
Here's the question: is because I know backwards compatibility has been the biggest thing, and Sony has really struggled with this because they have never come out with a way to play PlayStation 3 games other than owning Moose's 500 gig PlayStation 3, right? So
No, they have their catalog. If you subscribe to like PlayStation Premium or PlayStation Plus, you can actually stream PlayStation 2 and 3 games without having to download them.
So you can basically stream any game that's PlayStation 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
Let me look. Let me pull it up. Let me open it up.
But if you got the disc, you still can't play it locally though. You have to stream it from PSN.
No, and so this is what I was also thinking. Like, since the 3, my understanding of having a physical media, like the only reason I had a disc from like PlayStation 3 on was to not have to download the data, because from me having a PlayStation like 3 and 4, essentially you have like an install disc for a lot of games,
right?
And then really the disc, all the game does is check and make sure that you have the game like available, and then it stops reading the disc and it takes all the information from the hard drive because it has to be installed on the hard drive. So the discs were more of a key, like a regional key to say, I have the game, you can play it. So for a while, I don't think the discs have really been very helpful, other than for people who don't have access to good internet. Because I remember days of, midnight releases, and you come home and you got to, depending on your internet, download and update a day one update of, like 2 hours. Like
GTA
I can't.
5.
It's like 3 in the morning.
Oh yeah, I think, but when I got home from GameStop, picking up GTA 5 on the midnight release, it took me probably a good 3 hours because everybody and their brother was installing the update too. And at that time, I actually had decent internet. I think I was up around 100 megabit down, which,
Yeah, that's
2009
good. That was good for those
was
days.
no joke, unless you were in certain areas of Sacramento. But yeah, it's the PlayStation 3. I think they really did it right as far as the way they did the discs, because you could still install the game, and as long as you never connected it to the internet, you could play the game as it was originally released, which might not necessarily be ideal because, the day one patches that, really finished the game off. But that was still there for game preservation. And a lot of that is going out the window. And that I think is probably one of the big cons to shipping without a disk drive, because you're losing that access. But on the other
How many
hand,
how many gamers actually sit there and go to GameStop and buy discs anymore?
GameStop's not doing so hot, so I would assume not very many.
Okay, maybe it's Target or Walmart or wherever, right? But I mean, but that's it. Like, it's funny that we're talking about this, because I'm legitimately thinking, when is the last time I bought a physical media game? And it probably goes back over 10 years. It's easily been a very, very long time, because I'm trying to think. I do not have a disk drive on any of my PCs in my house. In fact, I don't have a disk drive in anything. I don't have a Blu-ray player. I don't have a CD player. Like, everything is streamed now. So the question is like, it's funny that, because this is a topic, but it's like, it's almost like the disk drives are like the last surviving thing is on PlayStation and Xbox. And it's like, these should have been the first things to be like, yeah, we're done.
Well, and I'll throw in there. So two things. One is, again, I think there's going to be a population of people that want to feel like they own something, whether or not they actually do. Because if whatever developer shuts down their servers, most of the games you're not going to even be able to play. I mean, look at this. What was the car game that they're Crew? Yeah, they're reopening it because so many people said like, hey, like, we paid for this game, we want it in perpetuity. But the problem is like, you don't own that. Like, the intellectual property is the person who runs the server, and if they decide to shut it down, they do. But there's like this idea where I own it if I have the physical media. But the alternate is not very fun either, where it's just like, I have to stream everything. I have to pay a subscription for my music. Do I really own my music? Do I own my game? Do I own the TV shows that I have? Or will I never really own that in the future? And I think there's, a generational split. And the analogy I'd use is in medicine. I work in medicine, and 90% of like diagnosis when people are sick come from the history alone. Just people telling you what's been going on. 90% of the time, your doctor knows what's going on by just you telling them. But there was a big kind of hesitancy moving to virtual medicine when the pandemic hit. Like, people just did not feel comfortable because they feel like they need to have someone listen to their heart and lungs and touch them and do these things. Like, there's that generation of people that feel like they're not getting what they paid for, even though the same conclusion is made. Whereas I think there's a lot of younger generation that they've never had their own stuff. It's always been fleeting, and you get something new. And I think they're the generation that's gonna, accept it, a diskless drive. It's just, us who, remember the days of we own something and we put a disc in, and so it's kind of nostalgic. And that was the last point I was going to make about the PlayStation. If I recall correctly, PlayStation was making a disc in conjunction with Nintendo to store data for their games. And essentially Nintendo did some shady business stuff and like went around them, and then they came up with their like GameCube discs, and like just like cut PlayStation out of the equation. And so like, I do think there's a little bit of like nostalgia for PlayStation and the disc drive, because I mean, that's what catapulted their company, was being able to have that disk and the data on the disk. So I wonder if that's kind of like one of those like, hey, this is who we are, like they're kind of having a similar hard time transitioning to completely digital.
And not to be the well actually guy, but
yeah, no, correct
that
me, please.
that prototype system you're talking about actually was a combination CD disc based Super Nintendo and PlayStation.
Oh, Super Nintendo. Okay.
And Nintendo ended up there was a deal with 3D from my recollection, the deal with 3DO that created that abortion of a Legend of Zelda game that everybody loves to meme on, resulted in Sony just telling Nintendo, yeah, go jump in a lake. And Nintendo's like, all right, well, we'll just do another cartridge. And then we get GoldenEye on the 64, which, in its own right was a freaking epic game.
Oh, yeah. Rare killed it.
The thing that really spawned the PlayStation was Sony getting hosed. And if it wasn't for the fact that Sony Music decided, well, okay, we could do this on CD and we could sell this as part of our music thing, it wouldn't have become the thing that it was. And, I think a lot of us have some good memories from that time. And to your point on the nostalgia factor, the PlayStation Mini sold like gangbusters, and not just because it was mega hackable. Like, they left the USB ports wide open. But also because, that there were a lot of really great games. And I think for the last couple of generations, we haven't had that. We haven't had those, GoldenEye 64s or, Turok or the original
Turok.
Tomb Raider.
Oh, Turok. Well, and you get into, at least for me, like some of the things like some pivotal moments, at least in our lives as gamers, where like I still remember like it was like New Year's and my buddy and I were playing like Star Wars on the N64.
Oh.
And we were like trying to like we're fighting the AT-AT and we're like trying to look around the corner without moving our character, and we're just like, oh man, like and like even like games as an art, like having experience like Shadow of Colossus or Journey, these things, like you don't have to have speaking, you don't have to have these other things. And I think we as parents, at least for me and my kids, I want them to experience like that slowed down pace of gaming, that like I'm going to go through something, it's going to be difficult, and then there's going to be a reward at the end. Today with the psychology of loot boxes and dopamine release, like these kids like go from thing to thing to thing, and it's insane how much like reward they get. Like they don't know what it is to like mess up on a level like 50 times and finally get it right, and like the reward that brought. And so I think that the nostalgia is like us trying to, hey, like these are the things we experienced in our lives, and yes, like Fortnite looks amazing and all these games look amazing, but I want you to kind of learn like where it came from and slow down a little bit. And I saw that with Kingdom Hearts, like you find a crossover and a storyline that is impactful, and it can be an experience, and instead of this like, oh, I'm just wasting time, I'm doing these things.
Yeah, well, and yeah, to your point, I've personally had a lot of moments like that really you can't experience anymore, like having to redo the flood fight in Halo Combat Evolved over and over and because you die just inches from the end where they have the save point. Like, let me save the game. Nope, you got to do it our way. And games like Elden Ring and the Dark Souls games and Bloodborne, those do kind of bring that to a more modern audience. But I kind of wonder if in 20 years we're going to be able to share that stuff with the next generation of gamers and say, hey, here's here's the joy of playing Elite on the BBC Micro, and then 30 years later, here's Elite Dangerous that you can look at in VR, and kind of take people through that progression of this is where it began, and kind of lose that connection to the history. And
yeah, and
that kind of bothers me.
I think from a medical point of view, I don't think they're going to be able to experience something similar. Like speaking for myself, like we're in this tween age, like when we remember what it was like to have, if someone wanted to get a hold of you and you weren't home, they had a voicemail. There wasn't an emergency all the time. You didn't have to respond all the time. And I do find that we ebb and flow, and we're kind of going back towards that. Like people are starting to slow down in their life and do these kinds of things. But I don't know if like this younger generation is going to be able to understand what it's like to go slow. And so they're never going to have the same experience as we did when, we went through that process and then had that reward at the end. Or when the speed of games picked up, like Sonic, right? Like the sense of going fast, or Gran Turismo, NBA Jam, right? Like you could just pass, jump from the half court line, dunk, right? Like it just, everything started getting so fast. But yeah, I think there are people who see the benefit in like slowing down and experiencing these things.
So yeah, I mean, with all of that said, I think all in all, wow, I am terrible at transitions.
Bring it back to the console. Why we would have a console?
Right.
I think.
What is it about the PS5 you think that Sony is really going after here? What's the market then? Is it to kind of warm people up to spending a lot more for a PS6, or is there something else going on here?
I think so. I think they're targeting. It's like the gotcha games. They can get the whales out there, and what's the PC game that's been in development forever? Star Citizen.
Star Citizen, yeah.
People have paid like $48,000 to have like every ship in that game, and it still hasn't even like come out. Maybe I'm mixing games here, but
nope,
maybe they're testing their whale population and see like who's gonna spend the money on it. I really like your point of seeing like how to price the PS6 to be effective, to make them money and see what people are willing to pay. But at the same time, I also think it's a product of global economy, inflation, all these other things, and basically there's I feel like I'm not super old, but I can remember when gas was 95 cents. Under $1.
I remember 65 cents, but I'm probably the oldest one here.
Well, we'll say California, so that's a little bit different. It was always a little more expensive. But I mean, I think it's also like hey, this is the cost of doing business, and this is the price point. But they're not. I think the outrage would be a lot more significant with PS6, because it's a new generation. Whereas I think a lot of PS5 owners are just, oh, that's a lot of money, I don't need it. And so the only people that I would, if I were not without a PS5 and I was still on a PS4, if I had the choice of buying a PS5 or a PS5 Pro, I'd buy a PS5 Pro. Like I was on an iPhone 13 and I just upgraded because for me that made sense. The sensors and the cameras and all that kind of stuff. The physical power of the thing was enough for me to upgrade. But I don't think people will be changing from the PS5 to the PS5 Pro. If they do have the capital, if I do, I would buy a better GPU.
Okay, so real quick, what's the value of a used PlayStation 5 then? Because obviously, if I've got a PlayStation 5 and I'm buying a Pro, I'm going to go sell it. So what's a good price for a PlayStation 5 here in PlayStation 5 Pro comes out a month?
I mean, it depends. Like if you're putting it up on Craigslist, Nextdoor, Facebook. I mean, 250, I think would be reasonable, for the hardware. You know, but if you're selling it to GameStop, they'll probably give you 150 and they'll sell it for, 200, 250.
And they might blow it out if you're lucky.
Yeah. Maybe. Just plug it in.
But
hold on, do you want to pay $5 extra to have the scratches removed from your discs?
Right.
Oh my gosh.
I do have to say this though.
Or you could spend $10 and get the resurfacer, I mean.
If you do like physical media, GameStop, if you buy a used game, you have a week to return it for full price, like no questions asked. So if you were willing to just go hard at a game and play a game and return it in a week, GameStop has that. So
at
least they did.
This is why the things we learned, used games from GameStop.
Right.
It's really interesting. I really think, we talk about this and, I'm listening to you guys talk about PlayStation and whatnot. And, if Xbox really turns into a service, and it'll be very interesting because, I think Game Pass is really, positive for a lot of gamers, and I think they enjoy that. But I think the other half of that is to realize that, Game Pass is good because it allows you to get access to the games that you and a lot of friends, are games that you wouldn't necessarily buy, but you'll buy it as a subscription. And it'll be interesting to see if Xbox Game Pass is allowing people to have access where you stream it. But then Microsoft is going to have the hardware behind the scenes to do the streaming, behind the scenes to do that. And it'll be interesting with price point because, I'm not going to have a physical disc or machine at my house, right? But someone is going to have to render that somewhere and then stream it. Right. And I sort of question, from a first person shooter person, I think the first person shooters are going to hate that because you're going to add delay after delay after delay, rather than to be able to have a local thing where you take that whole section of delay out. And on both the input and everything else, it'll be interesting to see if there's some pushback from, for indie games, like if I'm playing Zelda or Final Fantasy, I don't think that's a huge issue. Yeah. But when you get into first person shooters, Call of Duty and, Battlefield or whatever game it is that's more competitive, I just don't know if gamers will be like, well, I lost because I'm streaming it and my PlayStation person killed me because of that.
Oh wait, lag has been the only reason I've ever died in any first-person shooter game.
Yeah, I'm with you, Lakers. I don't know what Turbo's talking about. It's only lag that kills me.
It's only lag that kills me.
I mean, my KD would be $1 billion to 0. I mean,
I am $1 billion to 0. What are you talking about?
Well, you're a penguin. That's expected.
Penguins don't die. But I think it's really interesting because what I'm getting at here is that I do think there is some opportunity for Steam to come in if Xbox isn't going to have a console. Steam could absolutely come in here and do some crazy stuff. And if you looked, if
have Steam be the distributor,
Steam be the distributor, but then you sit there and say Steam could also, because they make so much hardware, why would you have Steam take your Steam Deck, take the screen off, increase the power, put it in a little set-top box with an HDMI 2.1 out, and there you go.
Drop a Zen 3.5 Strix point in there with 65 watts, and you're good to go.
And you sit there and say, well, why would you do that? Well, that would be a direct attack against Windows. And I could see gamers. There is some sentiment within gamers that Windows just sucks in general. And I think that in general, I think a lot of gamers are like, well, but Linux isn't better. Well, the problem is that with Steam Deck and all of that other stuff, I do believe it is absolutely changing.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
And
Steam Deck
so,
is pushing a lot of development with Proton and with a lot of the stuff that they're doing to port stuff to Linux without actually having to port it. Basically making it another checkbox option, just like with PlayStation and Xbox now.
I think it'd be very interesting to see what that does, because I really think that is an area where, if Xbox decides that they're going to stop the hardware, because I do think the hardware is super. I think for a lot of gamers, we talk about buying something and actually getting something. Are people going to want a subscription where they don't get anything? Like,
I mean, I think the new generation of, look at Netflix. They used to send you physical discs. Does anyone even remember that? Except for us old people.
Yes, I did things with them that. Never mind, we're good.
The CD ripper.
Hey, look. The statute of limitations is over now, so we're good. But yeah, I mean, I used Netflix like crazy when they did DVDs. Of course, I also worked at Best Buy and got my Netflix subscription for like half price. So, then 2006 rolled around and I stopped. But yeah, I mean, I've been, at least for my media consumption, outside of gaming, I have been almost exclusively streaming since you could be pretty much exclusively streaming since about 2010.
Now, my question would be this: as far as like first-person shooters and MMOs, with the cheating, don't a lot of the games, like, there's a level of like when the game is installed on your PC, being able to alter the code and be able to cheat in a way. So like some places, if you're streaming, then the code is not actively on your computer where you can manipulate it. But these games that are on your hard drive, like now you need BattleEye and you need these other things, anti-cheats, to see if people are running background programs on the hardware because it is installed.
Yeah.
Well, but even then, there have been physical cheating devices that plug into plug your controller to act as a middleman between the controller and your PC. I mean, controller and and
it's a big one in Destiny.
Yeah, and so I don't know if it's necessarily gonna look. At this point, anything that makes it harder for people to cheat, I think is a good thing, because I do think it's cheating in video games is a real problem. And I think developers have to spend a substantial amount of time. Now, the question comes in, and I don't know, is cheating like not popular, but is it easy to do on a PlayStation? I don't think it is, because I thought Sony had their system pretty locked down pretty good.
It is locked down pretty good. Except for those so for example, a lot of people would use a Zim or a Kronos, I believe, where
Kronos, that's what I've heard of.
Yeah, so essentially what they do is, because for example, Destiny came to PC and PlayStation, after a while, but the accuracy of a mouse and keyboard is just through the roof. And with a controller, the developers coded in extra aim assist when you're using a controller. So what people were doing is they'd use a Zim or Kronos to have the PlayStation or the PC render like the inputs from the mouse and keyboard as a controller input. So they would get the accuracy of mouse and keyboard with the additional benefits that were given to controllers of aim assist. And so it was really hard to combat that as far as cheating goes. But there are a lot of people that are able to network manipulate and DDoS certain players and different things like that on PlayStation. So that's been an issue. But I would say that for me, I think cheating in a first player game should be allowed. Back old Game Shark days, like 007 double paint guns, cheat codes like that.
I
That
love the
was
Game Shark,
fun.
man.
Yeah, it was great. Like I wasn't hurting anyone else. I was just experiencing the game in different ways that you could, and a lot of developers put cheats into their games.
Yeah.
And that was fun, right? Now cheating in a multiplayer game, competitive scene, that's where I think like, hey, we need maybe streaming is the way to go so that no one has access to the code. And, if you're going to compete in a esports tournament, it's all local LAN, but everyone has the same access point and everyone has the same speed and that kind of thing, because it just gets too hard to control it otherwise.
I'll tell you though, 4 players on Silo in GoldenEye with dual wielding rocket launchers it's glorious. I mean, I had a
Quake.
modded I had
Quake
a modded
3.
Xbox. And
Yes.
so I actually would go to LAN parties with friends and play Halo 2, and they'd be like, "How are you getting the dual wield brute shot?" I'd just be like, "Doot doot doot doot," and I would do it just to troll. But because I was hosting on my modded Xbox, I was able to let anybody do it, and
Right.
that was kind of the beautiful thing, is like we all got to F around and find out. And so, I think as far as the local multiplayer and the single player stuff, yeah, we should allow cheats. We shouldn't be putting putting BattleEye onto God of War Ragnarok, because
Right.
what's the freaking point? There should be no cheat detection in Helldivers because it's purely co-op. There's no competitive mode there. And it's kind of ridiculous that it is there. But that is the state of things at the moment, and it's just because there's a lot of jerks that like to make people's day a little bit worse when they're trying to relax. And so to kind of wrap this up, I want to get your take on the PS5. You kind of did touch on it earlier where, you said, yeah, it might be a good upgrade. What about people who haven't necessarily jumped into the console game yet? Would you say go get a used PS4 or PS5 right now and see if it's something you enjoy, or jump in whole hog and drop the $1,000 on the PS5, maybe a second controller, a game, PSN subscription? Because once you add it all together, it's about $1,000, and that's
easily,
before tax.
Easily.
And if you're Canadian, oh boy, you're talking 2.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this, like, I'll have to say, I have looked on like Facebook Marketplace to find a used PlayStation 5, because I'm like, you know what, it would be fun and it would be nice, because I do think that there is some value, at least for me with kids, to be able to have them play some games within it. And so I can see some value there. And so, like, if I could pick one up for like 150, $200, I'd be like, okay, I'll do it. But there's no way I would ever spend $700. But then,
No.
I'm not a console gamer. I'm a PC gamer. And so it's the notion of, I just look at this and I'm like, dude, that's a 7900 XT, or that's, I mean, I look at the used marketplace and I'm like, for $700, you can get a really good graphics card. And I'm like, yep, kids can do whatever they want to do with. I don't really care.
The 8800 XT is coming, and it's cheaper than a PS5 Pro, supposedly.
Yeah.
Well, here's the way that I look at it. I think it depends on where you are in life, right? If you're like I was as a teenager, my first job was at Best Buy. I still remember an E-Machines was the first like gigahertz processor, and it was like $1,000 for a gigahertz processing at that time. And you're saving up, like, just buy a used PS5. The PS4, there's a drastic difference there. Like the 30 frames per second, like going back to like see what I played on PS4, it hurts to see what I was dealing
the
with.
nostalgia just isn't there with the PS4.
It's not there with the 30 frames per second. And so I'd pick up a used PS5, and the thing's a workhorse, and I wonder if this is I think if this is the TI what's the one I had turbo?
The 1080 Ti.
1080 Ti. Yeah. It just worked so well for so long. Like all the newer ones just weren't a big enough of a change to even like compete with it. So that's where I think the PlayStation 5, like, it was so good at its time. So pick up a used PS5. I do like that a lot of the games, like single player games, like there's a beginning and an end to them. Having some physical place where kids are playing instead of like always in their room or always on a mobile, or I see that as an issue with like the Switch and Steam Deck, like always being connected to it. There's something nice about having it on a specific screen. But I think for the majority of people, the PS5 Pro is a test of cost. And they know they're marketing to the wealthy. But if I were like Penguin and I wanted something like I was using my PC and my kids wanted to play on it, or if I'm a parent that's not very technically inclined, like I think the PS5 or PS5 Pro is depends on how much their kids bug them, right? If the kid is screaming for the Pro, and I'll tell you, I haven't seen the advertising for it. I mean, normally when like a model like this is coming out, like, the advertising's 3-4 months out in advance, and I'm not seeing that. So I don't think they're really marketing to kids. Normally in November, Christmas time, everyone's trying to buy it up. But I think they're testing the waters.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the only people I see talking about are people like us and Broken Silicon and Gamers Nexus and the various other tech people in the tech sphere and on the interwebs. And I mean, I would expect to see something come across my feed like, hey, the PS5 Pro's coming and it's got all these great features where we list AI upscaling twice. But never mind, we list AI upscaling twice because we call it two different things.
I'm surprised they didn't call it the PlayStation 5 AI.
Throwing
Everything's
AI
now.
Throwing AI on everything is just
PLAI station. See, that's what they should have done. They should have said drop
PLAI.
STATION.
Just for the dad joke. Just for the dad joke.
And you got to make the A and the I caps and everything else like lowercase.
No, they got to be
then it's the PlayStation.
Italicized. Yeah.
The PlayStation. Yeah.
And on that dad note, I think we call it a day.
Yep. Thank you all for watching. It's been great having you on, Lakers. Appreciate you. And thank you everybody for being here. Be sure to like and subscribe and do all the YouTube algorithm stuff. And until next time, have fun storming the castle. Good night, everybody.